order. Lovely. Welcome, everybody. Am I on? Can you hear me? Yes, good. I am not Amrita, who was due to be hosting. My name's Rebecca Campbell. I'm Deputy Director for Content Gov.uk, and I work in the Government Digital Service, or GDS as we call it, which has just moved into the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, or DSIT. My team works with partners across government, and we're responsible for the delivery and updating content of all of the most used pages on gov.uk. So pages you've probably used in the last few months, few weeks, few days. And our content forms the front door to services that are used by millions of people like all of us. That might be applying for universal credit, renewing our passports, registering to vote, or paying our tax. And I'm joined by a panel of service delivery experts for a session to discuss the service delivery challenges that government faces, both within departments and across the entire public sector. We'll look at how government can transform services to make the most of digital technologies, and also to ensure, crucially, that the experience of dealing with government actually keeps pace with users' experiences of digital services and companies. So I'm joined by Gemma, Matt, Suraj and Helen. I'll invite you to introduce yourselves just in a minute or two each. Gemma.
Thank you, Rebecca. So I'm Gemma Hyde. So I'm on secondment at the moment to GDS, and so Government Digital Service. So Rebecca's described that for you. So I've joined to set up the new service transformation team. And in my normal day job, I have a slightly different take on this question maybe, I head up digital delivery at the Crown Prosecution Service.
Excellent. Hi everyone, I'm Matt Briggs. I am the Accountable Officer inside DWP for the modernisation of our services, which is about making it easier for our customers, 14 million customers, to actually get the entitlement and support and services that they actually require.
Hi everyone, my name is Suraj and I look after design and technology folk at something called the Nesta Group, which is two organisations, so impact innovation charity called Nesta and a consultancy called the Behavioural Insights team.
Hi everyone, I'm Helen Measures. I'm the National Services Director in HM Courts and Tribunals Service. We're responsible for the administration of the courts and tribunals in England and Wales. I'm responsible for the service delivery nationally through a lot of our large contact centre environments and service centres to deliver services to millions of citizens every year.
And hi everyone, I'm Alex Wolf. I look after public sector for an agency called Softwire. We've been really fortunate to work with some of these brilliant people in the centre for GDS, but also across things like voter registration and lots of others.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, all of you. So we're going to start with questions to the panel from me, but we'll also be inviting you to ask questions from the floor. So as you're listening, do be thinking about the questions you'd like to ask, and we'll come to you a little bit later in this session. Gemma, I'm going to start with you. From your central perspective in GDS, tell us about the big vision for the transformation of service delivery and how you're supporting departments in this work.
Yeah, thank you. So at this point, I'm going to launch into reading the modern blueprint for digital government. No, I'm not, it's okay. But hopefully everyone's had an opportunity to read the blueprint for modern digital governments. That was published in January, and you'll see a lot of work and thought went into that, both in terms of the state of digital government before it, and really that's our vision overall for where do we see digital government going. I thought I'd draw out three key aspects for me that I think are relevant to service delivery and service transformation, and talk a little bit more about those. So the first is really this concept of time tax, and thinking about for a citizen the amount of time that they need to spend and invest in dealing with public sector. And actually it's a week and a half on average for people across the UK that they're investing in that. And that's not just the time in individual services, it's the time to understand that there's a service that they might want to use or they might need to use. And thinking about it more holistically, I think really reframes the questions. One of the things that my team own is the service standard, which I know from when I was doing delivery, well loved, well respected. And one of the things in there that we always grappled with is solve a whole problem for a user. And any of you who've been involved in trying to transform services or change things will recognise that's really tricky to ask yourself, what is a whole problem? Is it the problem the person's trying to do in that moment, in the morning? Is it the overall problem? So, my son's just started school. What's the overall support package that's available? That's a really big whole problem. I do need that whole problem to be solved, but how government supports and brings everything together for that. And that's really, I think, the next phase of this. How do we get a bit more ambitious when we're looking at that whole problem and thinking about reducing that? Because that has a real time for people. It's time that they're spending, investing on services that really we'd like them not to have to. And this is also where it extends not just across central departments, but also across local government. And so one of the things that we're doing at the moment is a local government sprint, and Theo, I suspect, will touch on it in one of the sessions later, so Theo Blackwell. What do we do for local government? Because that's where those services really crash together in an inconvenient way for people quite often. The second thought is around what is the next generation of services. So now we talk about very visible services, but actually we're saying we want to be more predictive, more anticipatory, and actually those services, I think, will be less visible to a consumer or to a citizen, and that's great. That's what we want. But if we're leading that change, how do we think about what needs to be different to make those services feel different? And then the third thought is it's the comment in the State of Digital Government that transformation has happened in spite of the system, not because of it. And that's something that is really frustrating, but I think resonates strongly, that it does often feel in spite of the system. And so there's some key things there on leadership, some practical things around funding. And so the performance review of digital spend that we published a couple of weeks ago to change how we fund things. So how do we set up the right ecosystem and environment that you can do service delivery really effectively and really accelerate as per the accelerate stage?
Brilliant, thank you. Helen and Matt, this leads really nicely, I think, into a question for you. Where you're at in MOJ and DWP on the reform of service delivery, what are the big challenges and changes that you've already delivered and what's currently underway?
Do you want to go?
Yeah, in HMCTS, if you just take your minds back about 8 years, if you'd walked into any of our courts and tribunals buildings, what you would have seen is a lot of paper. We worked on really old, aged digital systems that didn't speak to each other. And our users would have to often come into a physical building. The files were all on paper. And we embarked 8 years ago on a transformation journey. It's a multi-year reform program. I could probably spend the entire time during this session to talk about how difficult that has been. But we are at this point at the end of that reform journey. But in many ways, it feels like we're now at the beginning of where we could go next, because what we've effectively done is laid the foundations for reform and development and service delivery improvements for the future from this multi-year program that has been incredibly complex. So if you imagine the criminal courts, the civil courts, family courts and tribunals, our users range from very, very vulnerable people, often at the most difficult part of their lives, right through to companies who are wanting to issue, or people issuing civil claims, and families who the decisions are being taken about their future. So our user base is really complex, and in that context, our previous way of working was really inefficient, really unequal, so it largely depended on where you lived as to what kind of service you would get. So it depended on how on top of the work your local court was as to how quickly you would get an answer to something. Now, what we've done through our reform program, we've got 14 modern digital services now that have been rolled out from that. And we've got consistently high user satisfaction rates. That's something that we're now able to measure that we previously couldn't. We've had 4.1 million cases submitted digitally on our services. Over 2 million cases have now been handled on our criminal case system. 500,000 divorce applications have been submitted online. Since 2019. So these are. I mean, I could sort of project all sorts of figures at you, but I won't. But one of the things that we've delivered is new service centres, and which is a completely different way of delivering our services. It's a completely different operating model altogether. Those service centres now, and that's one of the things that I'm responsible for, handle 5 million calls a year, about 3 million, 5 million emails, 3 million calls, and 40,000 interactions via web chat. Now, these are citizens contacting us often for help or advice. Now, we've now got the infrastructure to handle that service delivery in a completely different way to the way we used to. But what the opportunities are for us now is that when we, and we'll get onto this later probably, but when we're thinking about how we want to deliver our services better for the future, we've got a foundation to do so, embracing technology like AI so that we have got a better, more consistent service offering for citizens. So we've been through quite a difficult path to where we are now. But at this point in time, and you might have seen some communication on this recently, coming to the end of our programs, we are now delivering a service that is completely unrecognisable to the one that existed 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matt.
Probably going to build on that. There's a very consistent pattern that is going on across government, and it is really great to work with HMCTS, by the way. So huge thanks to you. We're really taking a sort of three-stage approach in terms of our modernisation and transformation journey. The first is, and being really, really blunt about it, a simplification stage of it. Our processes are too complex. We have had 150 different telephone numbers for people to actually ring into, actually simplifying that just experience. Our operational processes are just incredibly complex for people, for our own colleagues to understand, and then for customers to actually navigate is just really difficult. So a real simplification process. The second is sort of, we're coming towards the end of now, is what I would call the automation stage. It is the sort of top 75 projects, getting the data right, making sure that those services are available to people to use online, and really starting to think about it. And the third stage, which is the bit I'm really inspired by, is what I'd call the modernisation phase. And we're taking sort of it in sort of three broad principles. So two sets of threes here, broad principles. The first is actually making sure those services are joined up around the needs of the customer. And we've had some really great experiences for things like universal credit, bringing 6 benefits into one. If anyone saw what happened during the pandemic and around the world with welfare services, people queuing down the street, that never happened in the UK. So some really fantastic things that happened there. But also from a data perspective, sharing data with HMCTS, or a service perspective, working with GDS in terms of one login for government, the Gov app. So how does these things actually start to present themselves to customers? So there's that sort of joining up, and really, we talk about rewiring the state. Actually, for me, this is about hiding those wires from our customers and citizens. The second block is making those services digital with a human touch. And really, really important that human in the loop part of it, and making sure that the people who are providing services are given all of the right digital tools to actually support customers as well. Through it, so seeing everything from the customer's perspective and our user's perspective through it. And then the third bit is, we programmatise a lot of what we do with inside government, but the third phase is about becoming a continuously modernising organisation. So how we test things like AI and really start to think about how they're actually delivered, thinking about how do we encourage our colleagues. There was a discussion, if anyone was in here before, I think there were sort of 2 people from the Home Office, I think it might have been in the other stage, of going, how do I get my voice heard? Well, actually, we are starting to really develop about how do we become an organisation that hears from the front line and from our users. The difference it makes through it, the things that I'm really proud of is 18 months ago, state pension, if you claimed it, you was likely to be in a backlog through it now. Now you basically get it automatically. Through it, we know all of the information about you, sort of your point. We can actually say, you are going to get this and you're going to get it from this date. Do you want to opt out and defer that? Through it. So the relationship is fundamentally different. Satisfaction of that service has increased by about 20%, and the resources that we're deploying on basically doing processing and admin has reduced by about 30%. And actually those colleagues are now able to actually spend time with those who are the more vulnerable customers and actually spend time on that. So just seeing that experience in an 18-month period, I think, is just a big shift that we've seen.
That's really encouraging to hear. Great, and lots of crossover, I think, in themes there. So Alex and Suraj, coming to you now. You work slightly outside of government, but with departments and agencies across the public sector. What would you say is working well in the transformation of service delivery from your perspective, and where do you see some of the biggest challenges? And follow-up question will be, how are you working with them?
So I think a lot is working well. I think one of the things that is working really well is there's just a sense of optimism and belief that we can make that transformation, that we're seeing that, for a while, everyone was very busy with COVID. For a while, there was possibly a let's keep things going. And we're seeing so much enthusiasm that it's really contagious, that, yes, we can capitalize on this moment, especially from some of the centre as well and how that's all been reorganized recently. I think we're seeing things work really well in departments when they take a holistic view. So kind of my personal experiences with voter registration, and I think that worked really well because there were 3 ways in which they treated it holistically. They were able to take a really holistic view on who their users were. And I think we might touch on digital inclusion later, but with something like voting, you just can't afford to leave anyone behind. You create a democratic deficit, and ultimately you can change the results of elections because your digital service makes it easy for one group or hard for another. So they were able to kind of invest the understanding in working with groups who you hear less from. I think a team spent time with the traveller community and got the kind of support and buy-in of the Traveller Council to really go in and understand not about digital needs, but about documentation needs and just that time debt that you were talking about, Gemma. I think if you look at holistic kind of view on the outcome you're trying to achieve, and you touched on this again, it's not about letting people register to vote. It's about letting people vote. And that small reshifting kind of opens up the solution space a little. So one of the things that for a critical service like that they've been able to do is make use of continuous improvement. And that ties into lots of challenges like funding model. But they've been able to iterate and improve to the point where the overall service kind of gets to a 92% kind of happy or very happy satisfaction rate. I think the reason that's so important is we were listening to Chris Bellamy talking earlier about Generation Alf, and actually if you break down satisfaction for that generation as they start to use this, it's more like 65-70%. So kind of you just can't rest on the laurels, there's work to do. I think the last way in which they were able to be holistic, and I think hopefully would apply to other services, is it's not something that they treated as only a digital problem. So they worked with, at the same time as they were bringing in, say, voter identification, they were working with the constitutional team on what the secondary legislation could look like. And they were working with DVLA on how they could make use of their signature capture, and with DWP on kind of Nino validation. And being able to bring all of those together just meant that they could ultimately get away from a local maximum where they're digitizing a form and move to something that felt a bit more transformational, just in terms of how it was for users. Challenges, I think, are how you can replicate that in other areas where you don't, without putting the same level of resources in, in a world of tightening spend.
Yeah, very good point. Suraj?
I think just building really on what everyone said in many ways, and perhaps some context to the perspective that I'm bringing to this. So with the work that I do at Nesta and BIT, we have the privilege of both doing kind of commercial projects with departments, but also because of the way Nesta is an endowment-funded charity, we have a lot of agency to kind of create our own services and test things out. The way that manifests beyond, I guess, the client work is working with local authorities. So a great initiative in Stockport where we combined midwifery and home visiting services. Again, a tangible example, right, of joining up services and how you test and iterate that in a safe to fail and risk tolerant way, all the way through to kind of more exploratory and policy development style work. So we're working on 2 initiatives, one related to accelerating home decarbonisation and how you could do that on an area by area basis. Clearly, there's lots of industries, services, departments involved to make that happen. And how do you do that safe to fail discovery to make that policy the best it can be? An earlier stage piece of work all about integrated family support. So I'm sure any kind of people in the audience and listening who have small children will know there's tons of services. Figuring out the right one to use is kind of tricky and it varies across locations. So it's a real opportunity, I would say. And I guess to zoom in on the questions about what's working well and challenges, and again, I'll frame those as opportunities because I'm kind of glass half full. I think what's really working well is just the sheer maturity around service improvement. I mean, the speakers have highlighted tremendous examples of that. That shouldn't be underestimated. We've really come a long way. For me, it's also come across with the speakers here. The opportunity is about joining up services, making it holistic, making it seamless. That really feels like the next priority. And then the second kind of thing that's working well is I think the ambition investment has been really positive. And I guess the opportunity there is, or the challenge, I suppose, is often I've observed throughout my career that service improvement is not the same thing as service delivery. And actually, it's a different set of capabilities, a different set of enabling environments, different set of results even, right? Like how you measure service delivery is very different to how you measure service improvement. Like failing fast and safely is a good signal with service improvement. Yet, how do you create that? And actually, I think there's still work to be done, and it's variable, right, across kind of teams and locations. But overall, joined up services holistic, I think, is my vibe.
Yeah, so tempting to measure just what we've done rather than have we done the right thing and was it impactful? Thank you all. So a follow-up, and this is definitely a build on themes that have come out of what you've just said. Is there a risk that in the public sector we digitise services but don't necessarily transform them? What does reimagining actually mean in terms of fundamental reform?
In a word, yes, that is absolutely a risk. Indeed, we were having perhaps a silly anecdote. There was a presentation, it was talking about digitisation, and someone said, no, it's got to be digitalisation. And I thought, does this matter? It does, apparently. So apparently digitisation refers to making something digital instead of paper. Digitalisation is actually transforming it as part of that. So I think, it's a small detail, but it is really important in what we're thinking about. I suppose the glass half full type response is that digitisation is sometimes necessary, and actually I think Matt's talked about it really clearly. Sometimes you need to get it into the digital realm before you can transform it, and there are benefits of it being digital, whilst not necessarily transformed. I think now there's a real opportunity for us to try and leapfrog in some places, though. So when we are making it digital, how can we go faster? So 47% of services across government aren't digitised at all. That's not good enough. They need to be. Now, some services, they have 12 users a year. Actually investing that and getting that digital probably isn't the priority, but there are still some larger services that need to move into that digital realm. I think now what's exciting is that the kind of the building blocks that we've built across government, you can use those to do some more exciting things. And so not everyone needs to go through that stage of building the service. They can actually already use capabilities that are there to do the true transformation. And that's where joining up the services, and I think that's the real role of GDS, is to try and use the convening power to incubate those ideas, bring people together, solve that bigger whole problem so that we get towards those outcomes and ultimately the missions that we're trying to deliver across government.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think from a leader's perspective, I think there is a bit of bravery that you have to hold your nerve of going, I am not just going to digitise. That simplification phase that I talked about there, it was just so important, understanding the processes and really making sure that the user design was right, the actual support for our frontline colleagues in actually delivering those services. there will be pressure on leaders to just get this digitised and get something online and do something, and it's going to achieve some benefits. As a leader, it's a sort of your job of going, look, no, actually, we want to provide the right service to our customers. So I think there's pressure in the system to potentially lead in the wrong direction. I think the big opportunity, though, is I think there is a movement across government now that probably hasn't been there, because I think we've gone through a stage of trying to do things digitally, and I think there's a level of experience and maturity and data availability now that enables us to really think about those services differently, and I'm seeing much more coherence across government to enable us to do that join up in a much better way.
Yeah.
Great.
What this made me think was, like, some things are just harder to see. Right, so it's like you can see the app, you can see the web page, and like a lot of this stuff is about the glue work and getting people aligned to make change happen, because everyone kind of knows what needs to happen, right? But it's actually the great kind of collaboration to make that reality. That's the harder work of this, and I almost wonder, like, that's the work you need to do, to try to figure out how can you make clear what the progress is. And I think if the challenge is seen as purely technical, there's a big risk that it will just be digitization, making paper forms into digital forms. But instead, it should be more about meeting the needs of service users in a way that works for service providers. And there's like, that seems subtle, but there's a nuance there. Like, often the default will be, oh my gosh, the house is on fire, we need to get more efficient, let's solve our problem first. But shifting that perspective to say, well, who is affected? Who are the delivery staff? Who are the citizens that are affected? Our priority is to meet their need first. And that might actually mean we have to go to first principles and simplify our process, or maybe make it a bit more complicated to make it simple for them. That's okay. But it provides us a great anchor to collaborate around, and then it shifts that perspective. It gives you that common perspective to kind of say, no, it's not about just the outputs, the things we can see clearly. It's about the outcomes, the results, the impact.
I completely agree with you, because when I was thinking about it, when I think about this question, I think, yes, of course, you are at risk of digitalization rather than transformation. But I think the big way to mitigate against that risk is to put your users first. So who are the citizens, in our case, who are the citizens that are going to be affected? How will they interact with your services? And putting that at the core of what you do. The other part of it, of course, is the administration of those services. So in HMCTS, we have to think not only about what the citizens and our users need, but also how are we going to deliver that service, and will it work for the staff who have to themselves administrate it and deliver a good service. And so the way to overcome that risk, I think, is to put your users first. Think ultimately about what the outcome is you're trying to achieve. And then those two things together, you can achieve better outcomes. And I think other panelists have said that focusing on outcomes is really important, and it really is. You know, we can do something that is much more simple for the user, is actually much more complicated for us to administrate. And we have to do that knowingly. We've got some of our services now that through digitalization, actually from our side, is actually more complex, but it's much more simple for the citizen. And ultimately, that's the right outcome, but we have to do it knowingly. So I completely agree with what others have said. So definitely a risk, but not one that's insurmountable.
There's a great challenge of going last in that you build on everyone's brilliant ideas. I think one of the interesting perspectives I get to benefit from is seeing the private sector and the public sector and how both work next to each other. And I'm incredibly grateful for the public sector. I mean, I think we're 7th in the world rankings now, 2 spots below Ukraine, as they were very proud to tell us. But I think that actually the word beta is an interesting one, because as meant in UK government, it means we're not standing still. We're going to keep learning. We're going to keep improving. But then if you look at the private sector, beta is we're going to try this and we don't know if it will work. In fact, it might fail, and lots of companies do. But the ones that survive do reimagine how we do things. You know, Spotify was not an incremental evolution on CDs, you know. Some of the AI tools coming out now, I mean, just I would never have imagined them 2 years ago. So I think one question is, how can we create that culture of experimentation, not at a small scale in innovation labs, which, without a strong path to scale, but actually as something citizen-facing, where we are running betas that are true betas and where we don't know if it will work, but it gives us more license to reimagine, and quite possibly say, this didn't work, but this one sure did.
So segueing beautifully, actually. Thank you very much, Alex, into the next question, which is about new technologies, including AI. We know they've got the potential to radically change the way services can be delivered. Are you having to rethink approaches in the light of AI? And what does this mean for projects that are already underway?
So I think AI presents such an exciting opportunity, both in and of itself, but also because of the different conversations that people are having as a result. So I think people have been captivated through their personal lives with what it could do. It's something that when I was at the Crown Prosecution Service, some of our lawyers really wanted to embrace technology, some were far more reluctant. AI is the one topic that when we did research with them, every single lawyer had heard of it, and around 2/3 of them had started using it themselves in their personal life or at work. They really were curious about it. And that then meant that we could captivate a whole new audience with ideas of how services could be better that before weren't talking to us about digital innovation or how to transform service delivery. So it instantly reframed the question. So yes, there is something of working differently. Actually, it's often about embracing that different group of people and how you can leverage those ideas. I think that we've started to talk about it a little bit already. For me, the opportunity of AI is to use artificial intelligence to really deliver more human-centered services. And how do we make sure that is true? And that needs to be a reality that we don't just talk about, that we live in reality every single day to make sure that is how we're leveraging it. And I think there's something, how do we embed that in something like the service standard? So how do we help teams think about the right ways to embrace it? But also just have the conversation. If you're not doing it already, it's not something scary. Have a go, start to think about what you can do differently. And as Alex has just talked about there, start small, iterate, see what's different. And very much the language we talked about was experimentation. It seemed to give a different kind of psychological safety around it of it's an experiment, it's safe, we can see if it works or if it doesn't. So there's something there which sometimes it's quite hard to talk about experimenting because we know that experiments can go wrong. So how do we create those conditions?
Yeah. I might be showing my age here and being the oldest on the panel there, but there is just something for me about, I've seen technology change over a whole period of time, and I think sometimes we overestimate the short-term impacts, but underestimate the long-term consequences and don't prepare for those long-term consequences well enough. So quite a lot of what we're doing in the project space is, how do you get your data right? How do you get it organised in the right way that you know that you're going to be able to utilise AI potentially in the future, even if it's not there now? The second thing is, in the project terms, is don't have a very, very locked down scope, but have a very, very loose plan through it, because you don't know what the future is actually going to bring and how these things might shift, and you can adopt your plan in certain different ways. And the way I'm trying to manage this is not talk about the tech, is talk very much about what is it that we want our humans to do, either from our customer perspective, what do we want their experience to actually be, or our colleagues, where do we think they're going to add the most value, and then how does technology enable those things to actually happen? So instead of getting this little technology loop, actually start thinking about it in much more of a human loop around it, and that's where we're really trying to focus at the moment.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's also about just not forgetting the fundamentals with this and getting, there's a risk of being distracted by the technology. And we've been exploring AI for a little while now, so tangible examples. We developed a small chatbot to help installers of heat pumps. So again, it's a bit technical. And that's now being used by one of the startups we support, which is very interesting. Essentially, there's loads of manuals. How can you make it easier to understand all these manuals? We've been thinking also about the role of AI in the early years, particularly for the workforce and professional development. And then we think there's also an opportunity around the joined-up family support services I mentioned previously. Full disclosure, though, I'm a bit of a laggard on this. I am quite skeptical because I think you need to keep a focus on the fundamentals of delivering value. and regularly come back and assess and appraise, okay, we've added a new piece of technology, we've added complexity, but did that actually shift the needle in terms of the outcomes we care about? Or did it just add complexity? Did it make, we just blow a load of cash and not really see the results there? And I think practically on that, distinguishing between like discovery and delivery can be quite helpful, and you can bound it and box it in to kind of say, we're going to do discovery and intentional experimentation and learning to assess whether this actually adds value. And you should only leave that, again, I'm using discovery loosely, you can build stuff in discovery in my book, you should only leave that phase of investment, higher risk tolerance, once you demonstrate signals of promise, right? You shouldn't be going straight to releasing nationally in a delivery level a brand new AI feature without that, or a service improvement. I mean, just to be a bit more positive on AI, I think I have seen it enhancing knowledge work tasks in the stuff we do. So like if you're coding, it makes things easier. Knowledge synthesis, that's great. Yet to see game changers in the stuff we're doing, which is kind of developing and delivering services.
Yeah, so Rebecca, you asked the question, are we having to rethink? I would answer it that we want to. It's not that we're having to. We want to think about the role that AI plays. Now, in HMCTS, we need to think about the ethical implications of doing that, but we are thinking about how the sort of role in AI in our service delivery, and it really depends. So there's areas like that we're thinking about, things like transcription. So transcription for court and tribunal hearings is a really important point, but you can imagine the implications of a transcription of a hearing. If that was incorrect in any way, that could have really serious, long-lasting consequences. But we aren't sort of closing the door on that idea, but we have to think about it really, really carefully, both in terms of the sort of ethical implications of it and the procedural implications. In a different context, though, there are environments where we think we could embrace AI with a bit more confidence and in a bit more of a safe environment. And an example of that is one of the things I mentioned earlier about the scale of the web chat service that we now offer for some of our transform services. Now, we now know, because we've had web chat for some time, the sort of questions that we're getting on web chat. And in contact center environments, it's quite commonplace now, but we've all experienced where when you contact web chat, you're not really speaking to a person. Now, in HMCTS, you are actually, if you are contacting us and using web chat, you're speaking to one of my team who will be answering that. But we now understand the nature of the contact, and that then gives us an opportunity to say, if 80% of all of these interactions are about where is my case up to, or where do I go to for advice, that's the sort of thing that we could use more robotic processes and AI to try and signpost people to the right place. But when we are doing that, we're thinking about efficiency, both for the customer and for us. The taxpayer needs to get value for money. We need to be delivering a service really efficiently. So the reason why we want to embrace AI in environments like the one I've just described is because we can see that we could deliver a service more efficiently that's better for the taxpayer and more efficient for us as an organization. But yeah, so I've got some of the sort of reservations, but at the same time, I think there are some opportunities for us.
So I didn't think I was a laggard on AI until I spoke to some people here. There's so much going on, and there was a brilliant talk somebody did where he was showing how much it had progressed over the last 12 months. I actually don't think this is a technology issue. We were really fortunate to be involved with Moorfields Eye Hospital and DeepMind 6 years ago on some work that showed that what was called machine learning at the time could diagnose 50 eye diseases from eye scans just as well as radiologists. And if you think of something like that, the impact that could have in making sure that an eye scan taken kind of around the world really could get the same level of diagnostics as Moorfield should be transformational. But 6 years later, we're not yet seeing that transformation. And it's the other barriers to that. So for government in particular, I think some of the interesting challenges for AI are we don't do advice, because people are more and more outsourcing decision making. It's a trend both of the Alpha generation, but with AI. There's a really interesting stat I read in a report that using AI heavily leads to about a 35% reduction in critical thinking on the things you're using it for. And if we think of the users of our services applying that reduction to their interactions, how might we need to change our services? Might we need to make them more amenable to change? So it's not just people applying for something, but then later going, actually, my AI agent didn't quite get that right, so I'm going to need to change this on that form. You know, and it's a different model, but it's not about the tech at the minute. I'd say the tech is kind of well ahead of where we're ready.
Fascinating and slightly terrifying, actually, the reduction in critical thinking. The next question is picking up in some ways on this theme. Is there a risk that some people, for example, some older people or people with certain disabilities, might actually find it harder to access services in this new world? Might we be creating inadvertently a new group of digitally excluded citizens?
So I think really that's our role to make sure that doesn't happen. And actually, by thinking of those different user groups who might not be able to use the current digital services, that's where we improve the overall bar. So how do we raise the floor so that actually all services are more accessible for everybody? There will still be a group of people who can't, but actually that's where then we can invest that human resource in making sure we're really supporting them. So I think we need to be mindful of it, but we need to, actually, by thinking about more people using services digitally, that will make them better and being inclusive for all those users from the outset. And that's something, so we've recently launched the Digital Inclusion Action Plan. And as part of that, we're thinking about what's the kind of the labelling that helps you understand if you're about to use a service, what skills might you need so you understand, okay, yes, I've got those skills, or those are skills I might want to help develop so that I can use that. So how do we think quite differently about how people can access these resources?
Yeah. As a department that delivers things to an incredibly vulnerable group of people through it, I think I probably have sort of 3 observations around it. I think there is a real risk that we generalise, almost in the question. All older people are not digitally excluded. There are a significant number of the most able people. Disabled people who have to live their lives in a very constrained way are very, very digitally literate in those things. So us making assumptions in a quite a generalist way, I think there is a real risk of how we bring our own heuristics into this. I think digital exclusion is starting to change over time. I think presentation yesterday from Christine Bellamy really started to go, actually, there's younger people who are having service exclusion. That's not necessarily digital exclusion. Do they know what a NINO is, or national insurance number? Do they really understand what services actually are and how they're? So I think it's changing through it. And the things that I'm really interested in is who is it that people actually interact with rather than just us as a department. So we know that, for example, in Universal Credit, there was a lot of people who couldn't do things online. So we partnered up with Citizens Advice. So how they do help to claim the post office support for one login for government. It's about who is it that people actually access their services with and really joining up with those. And not all of those are inside the public sector through it. So really working across a broader set of boundaries.
And yeah, I agree. It really is a risk, and I think the main mitigation there is not treating digital in isolation, but considering the whole picture and those multiple points of interaction that you have. Like, we really need to be holistic and inclusive in that consideration.
Yeah, I mean, we have to, I've said it before, we have to put all of our user groups at the heart of what we do. And I won't repeat what colleagues have said because I completely agree. But I think there's an interesting element to digitization or digitalization in that because of the way that we've reformed a lot of our services and we have many more of our services now digital, we're able to collect data on protected characteristics. That then enables us to better understand where the barriers might be for some of our users when they are interacting with our services. So I actually think there's opportunity there, but in the design of services, you have to take into account the full spectrum of users and their needs. And I agree with what others have said. It's really important not to characterize some groups as being more digitally literate than others. I think it really depends. So yeah, I think I think within government we are quite aware of this, but then, as I say, using the data that we're getting to our advantage for future service design is where I think the opportunities lie.
Yeah, in our work we did on energy efficiency, we found a huge overlap between groups who were digitally excluded and groups in fuel poverty. So quite often the very users you're trying to address are the ones who are least able to access your service in some ways. To finish on a positive note, this is one area where I'm really hopeful for the impact of AI in kind of breaking some of those barriers down.
Brilliant, thank you. And that's all of the questions from me to the panel. So we'll open it up now. We've got about 5 minutes, so time for at least 1 or 2 questions from the floor. Hands went straight up there. I'll come to this person just in front of us. We've got a roving mic coming.
Hi there, I'm Melissa. My question's around team structures and organisation structures. So ultimately, I think when we're transforming different services, we're looking at transforming like the back-end teams that do deliver it. And I think that can be really great. We're slowing down to speed up. But I was wondering how we could build agility into the structures we then have to enable continuous innovation, but also how we can mitigate against negative impacts that come from continuous restructures.
Thank you. Helen, I think you touched on this a bit.
Yeah, so I think we have to think about it's a difficult one because you have to sort of take people with you. And our workforce, one of the things that has been most challenging for the ways that for the transformation program that we've been on has been bringing our people with us. And so the expectations of our workforce have had to shift. How do you make it sort of mitigate the risk of sort of building, or how do you build agility into the structures? I think you have to be really clear about what expectations are and what the expectations are of the service that you are delivering. One of the things that we're looking at in my area is having more multifunctional people who could deliver multiple different services depending on where the need is. Our demand on our services is quite volatile for some, but in other services it's less volatile. So what we're looking at is how can we use our kind of collective skills base with a workforce who are all used to using these systems so that we can get the most efficiency. But it is a challenge, but it's one that I think in modern government services you kind of have to overcome that, otherwise you are going to be less efficient.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone else wanted to come in, or should we move to another question?
Yeah, just same answer.
Yeah. Same answer. Brilliant, thank you. A couple of other hands. I'll come to somebody elsewhere in the audience. Somebody over there with the blue jumper. Sorry, I'm making the runners run. This is the point where the light counts against you. I can't see that well.
Thank you. So I really liked the idea about the kind of discovery, the beta elements you were talking about. And what I'm conscious about is in the financial pressures that we have, do we have the space to do this? Or is there just the pressure to make immediate savings, and that kind of exploratory, curious thinking doesn't have the space to breathe? So I just wonder what your thoughts are to that, and how do you overcome that pressure to find immediate savings with any kind of service reimagining?
Thank you. It's a topical one.
Happy to pick that up. So I ended up having a really good conversation with a lady called Margaret Heffernan, who did a book called Uncharted and something blindness, I can remember, willful blindness, through it. And she talked about forecasting, that you can only really forecast at your very best about 150 days out. You don't know what the future's there. So my response to it is I think you cannot afford not to work that way. You have to try and find as many ways. I don't think we'll get the savings if we just go, actually, we have one single answer and we're all going to it. The world will change. Things are there. You have to have multiple things at play to enable yourself to actually deliver it. And I think it's more a question of it's not affordable to do it the standard way. You have to do it the other way.
Alex, you look like you want to come in.
Yeah, I'd really hope there's a way to do it smarter and not just more. One of the things that while we're building systems across government, there's also so much knowledge and opportunity for reuse of learnings. You know, the research we did with the traveller community, I am sure someone else in government has done similar research either before us, after us, or both. So how can we make the savings on repetition and invest in the uncharted areas, you know, that we were talking about there?
Thank you.
And just like, I think it's very possible as well. So we've done something called speed testing, which is you time box it. So essentially it's 8 days over 4 weeks. You know, that's negligible in point of investment that you can kind of put to this. And also don't start with like whole service transformation as your first challenge. Work on like, the more tractable kind of challenges initially. And even if you only have an hour, hold the retrospective. That's literally the simplest thing you could do. Get all the stakeholders together, figure out what the learning improvements are, and then make a plan to do it. Like, it's very possible, even within tight constraints, I think.
Great advice. Thank you. I'm going to draw us to a conclusion there because we are now out of time. But thank you very, very much to all of the panelists. Great discussion. Thank you to the questions from the audience as well. I'll just come back to, I think, Matt, you described services with a human touch, and that's been very much a theme, I think, the theme of putting users at the heart of service transformation, focusing on outcomes, moving beyond digitisation into digitalisation. Good distinction there. Thank you, Gemma. And using tech really judiciously so that we can join up services but take them to where users are and so solve whole problems, bring service journeys together. Lots of themes, and then also themes about the types of teams, the types of ways of working that we need in order to do that. So thank you very much, folks. I've been asked to read out the name of the next talk, which I was told would be on here, but it isn't. So I'm going to trust that somebody will know. Or is it there now? Oh, yes. The middle one.
Yeah.
So the next talk is Making Innovation Happen, Transformation Insights from Government Digital Leaders. So please do stick around for that one, or if you don't, then have a great rest of day. Thank you, folks.